Today, I want to talk about something that comes up for almost every woman I've ever spoken to who is going through a separation or divorce, and that's shame. Shame is that quiet, persistent sense that something is fundamentally wrong with you, that you've failed, that other people are looking at your life and finding you lacking in some way. We all know what shame feels like. I want to explore where shame actually comes from, whether it deserves the power we give it. I mean, we all know the answer is no to that, right? Spoiler. And what you can start to do about it without stuffing it down or pretending it's not there or just thinking happy thoughts, because we all know that doesn't work. Because the question I really want you to sit with today is this: what if you could go through your separation and divorce without feeling ashamed? Not less shame, not manageable shame, but no shame at all. For so many women, shame feels like it comes bundled with divorce, like it's a tax you have to pay for leaving or for being left. For so many women, shame feels like it comes bundled with divorce, like it's a package deal and you have to pay that tax for. For so many women, shame feels like it comes bundled with the divorce, like it's a tax you have to pay for leaving or for being left. And I want to challenge that today and look more closely at it. Shame doesn't start with divorce. Before we go any further, I want to be really clear about something. Shame never starts at divorce. Divorce just activates something in us that was already there. I learned that a long time ago before my own divorces, and yes, there are two of them. When I was about 16 or 17, I had a boyfriend. At one point, he told me that his dad didn't think that we should be dating. And the reason was because I came from a broken home. My parents divorced when I was 6, and his father told him that girls from broken homes couldn't have healthy relationships, that they were high maintenance. Damaged goods, I think, were the words that he used, which was delightful to hear. Now, the irony isn't lost on me here that at the time, that same boyfriend was sleeping with one of my best friends. But what mattered wasn't the hypocrisy of that, it was how those words landed with me. I didn't feel like someone's it didn't feel like someone's opinion. It felt like confirmation of something. It didn't feel like that was somebody's opinion. When I heard those words, it felt like confirmation of something that I already suspected about myself. That there was something about my background, something about me intrinsically, that made me less safe, less worthy, and less chosen than somebody else. That moment didn't create the shame, but it gave language to something that was already there inside me. And I think for so many women, that's exactly how it works too. Shame starts early for a bunch of different reasons, and it gets reinforced quietly over many years. And by the time divorce arrives for us, it already has a comfortable home inside of us, and we're pretty sure of that feeling anyway. So let's take a brief step back and think of, no, let me take a step back for a moment. Let me take a brief step back for a moment and just touch on the history of shame and of women. Let me just take a step back for a moment and touch on a brief history of shame and women. I promise this won't be a lecture and there is no exam, so you can relax, just soak up the bits that matter to you. Shame, no. Let me take a brief step back for a second. I want to talk about the role of shame and women in society. I promise this isn't a social science lecture and there's no exam afterwards, but I think it's important to cover. Shame around divorce doesn't come from nowhere. It has a long history, and understanding that can take some of the personal sting out of it so that we can know it's not us. If you go back far enough, and I mean, we can go back further than this, but let's start at the 1600s. And women were too, if you go back far enough, and you can go further than this, but let's start at the 1600s. Women who were too opinionated or too independent were called witches, right? In the 19th and 20th centuries, women who divorced were actively excluded from social circles. Fuck off. If you go back far enough, and we're going to go to the 1600s here, you can go back further if you want. But around then, women who were too opinionated or too independent were called witches and burned at the stake or drowned. In the 19th and 20th centuries, women who divorced were actively excluded from social circles, from respectability, from belonging, and often from their own families. No-fault divorce arrived in Australia in the 1970s, and that helped legally, but it didn't erase that cultural expectations that had been there for generations overnight. Even now, women are still largely expected to be the ones who hold families together. The mental load, the emotional labour, the keeping of the peace, that is still overwhelmingly ours. And when marriages fail, people are looking to the woman to go, well, why didn't you save it? What weren't you doing? And if you want to go deep on this, Annabelle Crabb's book, The Wife Drought, covers it brilliantly. But honestly, most of us already know this from lived experience. So when a relationship ends, the sense of responsibility and failure lands squarely on us. If your partner was unfaithful, the question becomes, what weren't they getting at home? What weren't you doing? If you chose to leave, it's, did you try hard enough? What about the children? What were you thinking? What could be possibly worth scrapping your whole marriage for? We've all heard those questions. And I grew up in a house where I watched my mum carry that shame. So she struggled emotionally, practically, and in relationships, often feeling undervalued and letting herself be treated less than what she deserved as a result of that shame. My dad, on the other hand, remarried quickly. He moved on. He built a new family, a successful career, had a nice home on the back of a golf course. He had a great life because he benefited from that divorce. Nobody said it out loud, but the message I absorbed was really clear, and that was men get to rebuild, women get to be judged. Now, I want to share a little bit more of my own timeline, not because my story is particularly special. On the contrary, I want you to look at the pattern and see if anything here feels familiar for you. The first relationship I had that shaped me was coercive and controlling. I was a teenager who had already been through sexual abuse and some challenges in my family life. And by the age of 17, my self-esteem was low enough that I didn't recognize what I was walking into. That intensity of love bombing felt like real love to me. I felt like I was being chosen. I was told that I was perfect. It felt intoxicating after years of feeling invisible or unworthy. I married him at the age of 20. I was a baby. I have a child who's older than that now, and I look at him and I think, God, that's so young. What was I doing? But I thought that marriage would fix me, that it would validate me, that it would make me feel worthy because somebody chose me to be their person. Unsurprisingly, you'll probably guess that it didn't do that. It made me feel more isolated and powerless instead. He controlled who I saw, where I went, what I wore, how I wore my hair, just about every aspect of my life. And certainly, the finances. And I just felt so incredibly isolated. And I feel really lucky that I got to leave that relationship. It took me, as with many women, it took me several tries to leave. But at the age of 22, I did leave for the final time. And I didn't feel brave at the time. I felt leaving when I was 22 didn't feel brave at the time. It felt necessary for survival. I'd tried to... Unsurprisingly, it didn't do any of those things. Instead, it made me feel isolated, and it made me feel powerless, and it made me feel worthless. The man that I married controlled who I was friends with, where I went, what I wore, how I wore my hair, all of our finances, all of my choices in life, really, he controlled. And I look back now and I'm horrified at the insidious, gradual way that happened. And it gives me a great deal of empathy for women who are in that situation just how easily it can happen. And I know people say, how did she not see that happening, or how could you let someone treat you that way? But it happens so subtly and incrementally over time that it just breaks you down bit by bit. I left at the age of 22, and I feel really lucky that I did that, because staying could have just absolutely killed my spirit entirely, but I still had some left, and I managed to get out. I think I'd tried to leave 5 or 6 times, and I know that's really common. That women try to leave a lot of times before they actually make it stick. And I ended up actually moving to Edinburgh for a year so that I wouldn't be tempted to go back. And he wrote me letters every week while I was there. But I took that time to just find myself again. So by the time I came back to Australia and just went to university to actually get a career and start my life, I was strong enough to do that and to walk away from that situation. 10 years after that, I'd rebuilt. I'd been to university, I was finding my way in the world, and then I found out I was pregnant with my first child. I'd been at university for 6 years. At that point, I was 30. Children were not in my plan at that time. I was just planning on, being career Barbie for a while and doing my thing. I was in a de facto relationship with somebody. It wasn't solid. We'd been on and off for a few years. Things were shaky, and we certainly weren't in agreement about what was going to happen with that pregnancy. But I decided to go through with it and have my child. He stayed for a while, but we lasted 2 years before I made the decision to walk away. And this time I was a single mum with a toddler. I moved back in with my mum. I got on my feet. I got an apartment. I got a good job. And, life was ticking along pretty well for myself and my son. And then I met my second husband, and thought he was good for me at the time. He challenged me. He was interesting. And we had a good time. We got married and had 2 more children together. And so then I had this life that I'd always dreamed of, or that I thought I'd always dreamed of. I had 3 beautiful kids. I had a lovely home. I had an SUV. My life was like a margarine commercial. And I felt legitimate in some way, in a way that I'd never felt before. Like I'd finally done life properly, and like I'd earned my place in the world. But that didn't last either. And the whole thing was a facade. It looked good on the outside, but it wasn't. And it was controlling in other ways as well. Not in the ways that my first marriage was, but it was more insidious and more sneaky. And I'm almost ashamed to admit that it took me a really long time to see the unhealthy patterns that existed in that relationship. And it wasn't until I was actually filling out forms for family court and ticking boxes that I went, oh, hang on a second, those things weren't okay. But I was pretty strong, and I just wasn't interested in making that marriage work any longer. When my youngest was 4, I called time on that marriage too. And all of the old stories came roaring back, even louder than ever. I had 3 kids, 2 divorces, 2 different fathers to my children, a bucket load of shame about what must be wrong with me to continue to end up in these situations, and what people must be saying about me as well. But all of that is true. But having said that, no, all of that was true, but leaving was the best possible thing I could have done. I wasn't always okay after that. It was a really tough time. Those first 12 months were some of the toughest of my life, and I still am a little bit post-traumatic about that time. I have some triggers that just really set me off, and if I have a bill that's rejected or something like that, it was a white knuckle ride, and I did not know how I was going to pay my bills. And I was stressed and not sleeping, and I had a child who had special needs at the time, and I just was so stressed out. But I was also really determined. And I reconnected with my friends, with myself, and with what I actually wanted out of life. That wasn't the veneer, but actually, what I wanted for myself. And slowly that started to come back, and I started to feel more like myself than I had in years. And I know this is something that I hear from women all the time, that when they leave a relationship that they've been trying to make work for a long time, it's like you suddenly get to know yourself, and you are your old self again in a way that you haven't been for years. And it's really energizing and invigorating, and it inspires you to keep going. But those feelings of guilt and shame are incredibly common during separation. And here's why they're so hard to shake. If someone told you that you're terrible because you're too purple, you'd think they were kind of weird and you'd just move on, right? You would not give it a second thought. But shame sticks because it sounds a lot like our own voice. It taps into fears that we already have about ourselves. I'm a failure. I should have tried harder. I've ruined my children's lives. As you're hearing these, you might relate to one or two. You've probably got other ones as well that you're thinking about, that the messages that you tell yourself sometimes, and when somebody else says them, they just sting. It's like somebody sticking their finger in a bruise. These thoughts aren't neutral self-assessments, and they're often like cultural echoes, right? They're rooted in that historical expectation that women are responsible for holding families together. We're conditioned to believe it. So when something ends, we turn that blame inwards. We beat everyone to the punch and blame ourselves first because we know what's coming. Research backs this up. Women internalize relationship breakdowns far more than men do. During my second separation, my ex-husband said something to me that crystallized everything for me. I think during my second separation, my ex-husband said something to me that really fortified me and made me just stronger in myself, even though it was designed to do the exact opposite. He said to me, "Who's going to want you? You've got 2 kids to 2 different..." No, that's not right. He said, "Who's going to want you? You've got 3 kids to 2 different fathers. You've been divorced twice. You're so damaged." Which is incidentally a fairly good reason to be divorcing someone if they're going to speak to you like that. But that line didn't create the shame in me. It just pulled together everything I'd already been taught to believe about myself over many, many years. Society is deeply unforgiving of women who have had multiple relationships or children to different fathers, but it's nowhere near as unforgiving as we can be to ourselves. Shame feels so personal, but it's actually conditioning from society, from family, from years of quiet accumulation. It just... Shame feels so personal, but it's actually conditioning from society, from family, from years of quiet accumulation. It just sounds like our own voice, which is what makes it so convincing. Sneaky. But there's some good news here too, and I want to pause for a moment because I know that was a lot, and I don't want to just leave you in the heavy part because it all sounds pretty pessimistic and like it's really hard to get out from because society is built that way. But while separating is genuinely painful and women are often more disadvantaged, while separation is genuinely painful, and if you're listening to this, you probably know that already, and women are often more disadvantaged in the short term, while men go on to have these successful careers and second families and, new homes, the long-term research actually is really encouraging for women particularly. Most women return to or even exceed their previous levels of well-being within a few years. We've done our research at Women's Divorce Academy too. We asked our members a while back whether they were happier, neutral, or less happy after their divorce. And I really want you to sit with this and soak it in. Every single woman who had been separated for 12 months or more said she was happier than before. 100%. Every single one. Isn't that cool? Like what survey ever gets 100%? And this wasn't because their divorces were easy, and it wasn't because there were no regrets. It was because they had this clarity, this autonomy, and this self-trust that had slowly replaced that survival mode, and they'd reconnected with themselves, and they'd actually taken some time to think about what they wanted out of their lives. They'd taken this life pivot and made it work for them in a way that you don't get to do if you stay married, because you're always thinking of other people and you're always working together to create a shared future, they were actually creating a life that was just theirs. I can't promise you that that's how it will go for you. A lot of it depends on the work you're willing to do. And the commonality amongst the women who were in Women's Divorce Academy is they'd all committed to working on that and to moving forward. But it is a reminder that where you are right now is not where you'll stay. That one is guaranteed. Now, I want to share four things. Now, I want to share four things with you that I've learned about shame, things I hope will help you when you're in the thick of it. Lesson one, shame grows in dark corners. When shame stays tucked away, it feels head. So you start a sentence with, the story I've been telling myself is XYZ. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm too stupid. I wasn't a good wife. I wasn't a good mum. You're not looking to be fixed or corrected. You're just looking to be witnessed, to be told, I hear you. I get it. You're not a monster. And when you put that little bit at the start of the sentence, the story I've been telling myself, you just create a little bit of a distance. It's not a fact. It's one version of events that may or may not be true. And that's just letting just enough sunshine in to give you some breathing space. Shame doesn't dissolve through logic, it dissolves through connection with somebody else, with being seen, with being recognized. Lesson two, patterns are not proof. This one was a big one for me. Your relationship history is not your scorecard. Patterns don't mean you're broken. They reflect what you learned, what you tolerated, and what you believed you deserved at the time. So for me, intensity felt like love, and being chosen felt like safety, which made complete sense given what I'd grown up watching. But it took years of therapy to untangle that and for me to see that it wasn't necessarily all my fault. I may have had a role in all of those breakups, but it certainly wasn't my fault entirely. And if therapy is available to you, I really encourage you to access it if you can. I know here in Australia we have mental health plans that get you access to heavily subsidised, I think it's 6 sessions, and then a possible optional 4 sessions after that in a year. It's a fantastic program. If you're not in Australia, check out what your local support might look like. But I thoroughly recommend you access therapy if you can. It can really help you make sense of things in a way that are hard to do by yourself. Lesson 3 is other people's stories are not your stories. Everybody speaks from their own wounds and limitations, whether that's your parents, your ex, the school mums at the school gate, the people with opinions about your choices, and there will always be people with opinions about your choices, but none of their narratives are objective truth. Maybe your mum thinks you should have stayed. Maybe your ex told you it was your fault that they strayed with their secretary. Maybe someone is telling you a story about what you did or didn't do. None of those things are your stories, and they are not yours to carry or to prove correct or incorrect. Healing often looks like noticing. When we're healing, that often looks like noticing where someone else's story has quietly become your own inner voice, like a cuckoo that moves in and just takes over, and gently giving it back to them. Lesson 4, you're allowed to question everything. You don't have to accept every thought as truth, even the ones that are in your own mind. In fact, especially the ones that are in your own mind. One of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is simply, is this actually true, and what proof do I have? Shame can't survive scrutiny a lot of the time. The more you question it, the more you pull it apart, and not aggressively, but gently and curiously, the more it starts to unravel. You can start to think, is that actually true? What's the evidence I see of that? Is there any evidence that it's not true? What is another possible explanation? I know that in the early days of separation for me, I know that in the early days of separation, when your whole life feels like it's on fire, pausing to examine every thought sounds like a lot. And you don't have to do it constantly. Good God, you'd give yourself a headache. But if you catch yourself sometimes and just notice that you're having a negative thought, maybe just take a minute and just go, what's happening here? That's a good start, and it's enough for now. Don't overwhelm yourself with trying to fix everything. One shift that helped me enormously was moving from I am ashamed to a part of me feels shame right now. That part isn't the whole of you. That part, might not even be permanent. And it's actually trying to protect you from something, from rejection, from vulnerability, from the risk of being seen and found wanting. It doesn't need to be pushed away. It's a little voice in you that just wants to be heard and understood. Often just taking the time to sit with it and think, what does that part of me need right now? That can be really powerful, and it can be enough to just let it be. So, something that I really want to make clear too here with all of those tips is none of this is about self improvement. You have enough on your plate right now without even worrying about self help. So, this is about just forming a compassionate relationship with yourself. Different things work for different women, so pick what feels right for you and give it a try. See what happens. Meditation has been hugely helpful for me. The year I separated, and it was on the 2nd of January, so I had a clear year in front of me. Made the commitment. I made the commitment to meditating every day for that year. And I fell in love with it and have done it every day ever since. And I'm now studying to be a meditation teacher. I think it's such a wonderful, enriching practice, and it's made my life immeasurably better, and it's helped my mental health so much too. I, have had anxiety my whole life, and I have just found it quietens those voices, and it just allows me to be still. If you want to try it, Insight Timer is a brilliant free app. In those early days, Sarah Blondin was my go-to meditation teacher on Insight Timer. Her meditations feel like a warm hug. Tara Brach is also wonderful for helping you to deal with those really challenging thoughts. Journaling is something I have a love-hate relationship with. I know that it's helped me, and so I do sometimes force myself to do it and sometimes avoid it entirely. I can swing backwards and forwards with that, although I do keep a notebook next to my bed and I write down 3 or 4 things that went well in my day every night so that I go to bed feeling positive and noticing the good things in my life. I find that really helpful. And again, that's not about pretending everything's great. It's just about what you notice. So I do it most days now. And yeah, I find it invaluable for getting the thoughts that are spinning in circles out of my head and onto the paper. And often that's where they stay, which is wonderful. Another simple evening practice you can have when you're really in the throes of that self-judgment is to write down one judgmental thought you've had about yourself today in the evening sometime. And then you ask, is this actually true? Is there evidence that it's not, or that it's harsher than it needs to be? What would I say to a friend who came to me with this same story? And just journaling on that, even just half a page, it doesn't have to be long. And another tip is please be really selective about who you trust right now. Set boundaries with people who trigger your shame. You don't owe everyone access to what you're going through. You can choose who you let in and who you maybe save for later. I know there's a lot in this episode. There's a lot of tips. There's a lot of I know there are a lot of tips in this episode. I will put them in the show notes so that you can have a look afterwards. You don't have to be keeping count of everything. But I want to wind up by referring to our great friend Brené Brown again, because she put so many things better than any of us would. Shame hates it when we reach out and tell our story. It hates having words wrapped around it. It cannot survive being shared. This is why connection matters. This is why community matters. If anything in today's episode has stirred something in you, that recognition, discomfort, questions you might have, you don't have to do all of this alone. Our Women's Divorce Academy community is there for exactly this. Come and share in a safe space, come and listen, come and see that you're not the only one. This work isn't about getting it right. It's about supporting each other through one of the hardest chapters of your life and turning your divorce into one of the best things that ever happened to you. Thanks for being here today. I'll see you next time.